ignorant forces in Iraq, in Egypt, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Lebanon. They commit crimes. And they tarnish Islam, its image, an ideology based on reason and affection and love. The fundamentals of the Islamic Republic of Iran is based on these articles in the Constitution. Number one, democracy and the people's will and authority over their destination. Spirituality, independence. Article 4, economic prosperity. Article 5, unity of the Muslims. Article 6, justice for the nations of the world, to achieve peace and awakening of the nations. And therefore, the presidential election in Iran is the only way to guarantee democracy and the people's right of self-determination. The dear Grand Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, we are grateful to him. During his leadership, based on the ways of Imam Khomeini, he has protected our democracy and continuously laid the grounds for the nation.
So there we are, as we get the good idea of what's to come, summing up what's gone before in Iran and Iranian politics, as we wait for Hassan Rouhani to be officially inaugurated. Of course, there are several key challenges facing Mr. Rouhani. He's got to deal with the issue of political prisoners. He's got to deal with the relationship with the supreme leader. He's got to deal with the economy. He's got to deal with the nuclear standoff with other world powers. And off the back of that as well, I guess, the relationship with the outside world and how that will play out over the coming months and years. We're talking to James Reynolds, our Iran correspondent. Interesting, James, just picking up on one idea from that preamble speech that's still ongoing, talking about the martyrs of the war, and you were making the point that still this country perceives itself in that frame of Iran and Iraq.
It does, and when you speak to a lot of people from Iran, they say, we haven't invaded anyone. We didn't invade in that war. They say they were invaded by Iraq. Of course, history will dispute some of the circumstances prior to that war, and they say that they were the victim of chemical attacks from Saddam Hussein, and they feel that the West supported Iraq. You'll remember those pictures of Donald Rumsfeld, the envoy of Ronald Reagan at that time before he became Secretary of Defense, shaking hands with Saddam Hussein. Essentially, a lot of people from Iran, they don't necessarily have to support this particular government, feel that there has been a pattern of the West and Britain and the United States in particular always taking the opposite side to them. So if it does ever come to negotiations, one thing that's often forgotten by Britain and the United States is that Iran will come to the table feeling that there's people on the other side of the table have been duplicitous for about 50 or 60 years, and there is an entire gulf between what Iran remembers from its history and the history that Britain and the United States have sometimes largely forgotten.
Yeah, that was the key thing as well that speaker went on to talk about. It was almost as if, as a function, this country still feels isolated. It still wants to say, hang on, there are issues here that you're not getting. You're seeing it from your side. You are not seeing it from our point of view.
And I think that's been the thing that I've noticed most in the years that I've been Iran correspondent, is the different way that people loyalists to the Iranian government see the world. And they see conspiracies all over the place, and the way that the rest of the world doesn't see those conspiracies. Now, part of the reason they see conspiracies all over the place in Iran is that there happen to have been a lot of conspiracies against them in the past. But I think the problem now is that sometimes they will see conspiracies where there aren't any, and that makes dialogue or trust particularly difficult to establish.
Okay, as we watch these live pictures, James, let's just take a little skip through some of these big issues. Political prisoners, number one. Okay, there are what, 800, 850, we think maybe, we don't know for sure, political prisoners locked away. He can't open the prison gates. How does he do it?
By talking to the supreme leader. I think that he doesn't have the power to ring up Evin Prison in Tehran and speak to the governor and say, I want you to open jail cells 5, 6 and 7. He doesn't, I think, have the direct power to call for an end to house arrest of the leaders of the Green Movement, those men who ran for president in 2009, who thought they may have won and were subsequently put under house arrest. The only power he has is the power of persuasion. And that's in a way a very old-fashioned definition of politics. He has the power to sit down with the supreme leader and to try to argue this is why it might be in the supreme leader's interests, in the interests of the Revolutionary Guard, that powerful institution, to allow some people to have a bit more freedom.
Okay, so there's almost a cascading effect here into the next big issue, which is the relationship with that supreme leader. In that regard, would it be an easy get-at if the West sees him as a liberal, when he's not actually a liberal, he's maybe more of an insider?
Yeah, precisely. I was asked that on a previous BBC programme just now. They said, is he a liberal or not? I said that would be very dangerous to call him a liberal because he has been defending...
A hawk, or is he a dove?
Having met him close up for this film and over the years as well, do you see a side of him that's not so often reported internationally, something about his character?
Well, even his critics would admit that he's got a charisma. He's very quick-witted, and he's able to charm people by his we call him a wordsmith. And even the Palestinians, who've been involved in really, really tough negotiations and really some hard bargaining, will sometimes succumb to laughter when he comes up with one of his great phrases. But I suppose, you know, personality is one thing and politics is the other. And at the end of the day, he's a politician, so he'll be judged by what he did rather than by what he said, even though he said some rather extraordinary things.
And if you're in Tel Aviv, you can see Our World, Perez at 90, at 2:30 on Saturday afternoon, as well as other times across the weekend. Still to come on Weekend World, the rise of China, a welcome trend or a worrying threat, and the Mountain Kingdom, which values happiness over wealth. Each month, some of the BBC's most experienced journalists get the chance to explore the biggest issues of our time in The Editors. This weekend, China. Is this emerging superpower our friend or our foe around the world? The BBC's World Affairs editor, John Simpson, is in Beijing to find out.
The Chinese dream and the world's dream are similar. We hope China's development can achieve a win-win result with the world.
Going through my notes, it seemed to me that in spite of the highly formal way those answers were